Fisheries biologist, just the hatchery manager here. I started in 2016 here. Some of my history, I grew up near Macokota, and on a family farm up there. I went to Wisconsin Platteville for a couple years, Iowa State, and made it through 11 rounds of Iowa DNR, and ended up here in 2016, actually the end of 2015. Does anyone know this guy's name? Has anyone actually visited the Button Museum? It's a cool 3 people. Go see it, 4 people. It's a cool place. Terry Eagle was the director when I first started there, or when I first started here, and he really got me into the history here. And Muscatine has an awesome history because of the button industry that I really hadn't known about. And this guy right here was a German immigrant that came. He used to make buttons in Germany, and they used to import shells from the ocean, and that's how they make their shells, or how they make their buttons. That was the classy buttons to wear back then. And how Terry Eagle talked about it to me is that back then, you kind of had the clothes on your back. That's what you broadcast to show that you're a professional or an older professional to get more business. And the thing about pearl buttons is that in that time, they're what showed you had some clout, that you were making it, you were doing good. And so people didn't want to wear just a bone button or a wooden button. They wanted to wear a pearl button, and that's what really started it. And he was running out of shell over there, and he got a shell shipped to him from the Muscatine area of the Mississippi River, and he's like, wow, this is what I'm looking for. And so he moved here and started the whole industry. In 1886 is when he moved here, but by 1899 the industry had already taken off so much that the massive harvest was seeing a decline in the mussels in the river, and by 1916, 40 million buttons were produced out of the Muscatine, $236 million, or 235. And by 1925, the industry was in decline already. You can see the massive amount of buttons these people took out of the river, or buttons, mussels out of the river. And this was the lifeline of people. This is how you made money, how you fed people in this area, how it was, this is the Great Depression. This is how you put food on the table. And it was a great economy. It was another line from Terry Eagle, the director there, the former director, the gold rush of the Midwest, I think is what he coined it. And it really was. It really was. And so this was some of the equipment they used. And one of the biggest things that changed back then is they figured out they could use these crow's foot brails. And it's basically like a long stick with those hanging off of it. And I've actually used one of these on Red Rock Reservoir in central Iowa. We were searching for mussels. They work. It's crazy because how a mussel orients itself up into the bottom sediment, and then these things drag over the sediment. And you can't see it with this setup here, but you notice there might be there's a little ball on the end of those. And so those little balls kind of drag over the sediment, and it drops into the mussel, and its instant reaction is to clamp down on that so nothing else gets in there. And the darn things worked. And that's all those little larger, here I'm pointing at that screen. You can't quite see it here, but there's mussels hanging off of those rails. And it's a huge industry here. And from what I've heard, the riverfront in Muscatine was just coated in all those mussel shells that had the buttons drilled out of them. There you can see this little girl sitting on a pile of mussels. There's the blanks taken out of there to create the buttons. I keep wanting to point at this screen for some reason. I think I need my clicker with me. But just a massive amount of mussels taken out of the river. Some more riverfront photos. You can see the brails sitting there on the boats, ready for the men to go out and collect some more. The mussel factories here in Muscatine processed all of that. And one of the unique stories, I can't remember if I found a picture of this or something to describe it. I guess I didn't have it here at this moment. One thing I learned as well that I thought kind of blew me away. So the mussel species in North America are one of the most imperiled species. We used to have a ton of them, and they have really come down. And it was a lot to do with the mussel industry, or with the button industry. And it wasn't just that the mussels were harvested out of the Muscatine area, because they were really harvested out here really quite quickly. they were also harvested out of faraway places like the Tennessee River and out east. And they had railroad rails built to the river so they could scoop those into those cars, put them up on rails, and not go to factories over there, but actually ship them to Muscatine so they could process. So we were like the center of the nation of all of the gold rush in the Midwest. All those mussels being sent here to make those buttons. There you can see drilling the blanks out. I should bring that photo out that's in there, but you can kind of see it on some of these cases back here. What was that? There you can see some buttons here. I think we had a mussel shell here somewhere. I don't see it at the moment that has all the holes cut in it to make those blanks. So this is a huge industry. It's a huge deal. They're making lots of money, and all of a sudden they see they don't have any more mussels, and they're even taking them out of the rivers out east, and they're losing mussels out there. So they realize they've got to do something quick about this. And so some local groups here from the Button Manufacturers Association bought the 60 acres here and gave it to the federal government. And in an act of Congress in 1908, they built the Fairport Biological Station right here. It's actually on this building was built kind of on the grounds of the original building. How many times am I going to go ahead there? This building right here sits right on this footprint here. So they built this whole place to research how are we going to propagate mussels to put back in the river so that we can have an industry again. If you notice when you drove in here, there's a pond kind of right up by the road. That's our gravity-fed reservoir. So we'll pump from the river, all the water goes into that, and it flows down to all our ponds still. This is the same reservoir, the same cement that's up there right now. And you can see, here's the mule team that actually dug that back then. And we have the real picture hanging in the office in there. The structure that was recently taken down was the original pump house. It still is down by the river. It did not have the smokestack on it. That was built in 1910. I think it was finished maybe by 1911. They had an original lab just down by the river as well, and that's where they first operated out of before they built the structure here. And they raised fish and fish here. And why did they raise fish here? When they raise mussels? It's because of the life cycle. And I talk about this later on in my presentation. I should put a little photo here as well. But it's the life cycle of mussels. So how they actually reproduce is a lot of them will have a lure that will come out of the shell and it'll flap around and it'll look like either a worm or a small fish. And then a particular species for each particular mussel species. So maybe like a largemouth bass will be on a pocketbook mussel, or a skipjack herring would be for an ebony shell mussel. That mussel is particular to a particular species of fish. And so the research had to figure that out, and that's why this is a fish hatchery, even though it was started for mussels. It brought scientists from all over the world. They actually called this the Woods Hole of the Midwest. It was a big deal here. The original ceremonies, opening ceremonies in 1914 had 5,000 people. You know, that was before, that was horses and carriages coming here, along with maybe a few vehicles, but I don't know, vehicles in 1914, I have to think about that. Model T came around. I think that's slightly before that. I think I've seen a photo of it, and it seemed like there's a lot of horses in that. You know, 5,000 people, that's a big deal. People were really excited about this. However, they packed that building with all sorts of papers from all over that say, hey, we got this great big building. We're going to put all the research that we have in it because the federal government has a great place for it. 3 years later, it burned down. Lost all that research. And so they put a new building up. It's right there already. This one was brick. The original one was actually stucco. And we still have an original building here, one left. And it's right up there. When you leave here tonight, you'll see it, the original barn that they had here. So they would have the horses in there to actually move all the fish around and do some of the work around here. And then there's 2 ponds over there beneath the barn. And that was actually pasture for the horses. One of the first things they completed here it was thought in the past that we need to rescue these fish that are out in the river. A lot of times we'll have fluctuations with the river. Fish will get caught in some of the side areas. We should rescue those, and then we can stock them into other waters. And so fish rescue for the federal government, this is in the early 1910s. The Iowa Conservation Commission, at least the beginning part of it, they did the same thing. And so the Iowa DNR basically, and the feds, they were going out to rescue fish. We had to rescue those fish, and that's what they used for propagating mussels. And they had people going out to do that in just horrible conditions. You can imagine in the summer trying to do that if you're trying to rescue fish in a dried out area. This is also back in the time when malaria was still around. And then getting back to the original John Bethel picture, he actually died here because he stepped on a mussel shell either while doing research or doing one of these fish rescue programs and died from an infection by stepping on a heel splitter is what the mussel is called. You can imagine how you got a cut. It's got a sharp edge on it. And so they had the rail system back then. They take all these fish that they rescued and just dump them off of every bridge that went across the river all across Iowa. And that's where the fish landed. And so a lot of our genetics we even look at today, we're starting to finally look at that, originate from these fish rescues where we're just chucking them off the terrain back then. Here you can see some of the original fish cars that they had built specifically for this purpose. And some of the interior shots of that. You can see the ice they put on there to try to drip into there and keep that water cool and keep the fish alive for going across the state, sometimes even across the nation, depending on where those fish were going. Sorting fish. This looks like one of the old cement raceways that we had here at the hatchery. There was a cement raceway building down there. I think it was just below that is where they were sorting the fish here for stocking. And the Keokuk Dam was the first lock and dam on the river. And the director of this facility, a man by the name of last name Coker, he really came out against this and said, if we do this, we're going to lose the skipjack herring because it's a species that likes to migrate up and down the river. And sure enough, we did as soon as they blocked this. And so then we lost the ebony shell mussel as well. One of the cool history components of this building that used to sit right here as well is in World War II. In the 40s, it actually had a POW camp. So they shipped it was like 80 prisoners here, and they lived in the building. There's a story of them describing them cleaning out the whole facility because the hatchery production, or the freshwater mussel research had actually not stopped in the mid-30s due to a loss of money. And so the building had kind of fallen in disrepair. And so all these POWs kind of cleaned it up, and there's a story of them talking about kind of getting it all cleaned up with German hard work and cleaning, and got it all looking good. I don't see it right now. Oh, here it is right here. This is actually just brought in today, so I thought this was pretty cool to show. We had a German immigrant, we had a German citizen email me, I think it was last year, and he said, my dad was one of the POWs here, and I just wanted to come and see where he was. And he said, I have a box that was made there and given to him by one of the other POWs. This isn't particular to that box, but it's the guy that made that box. I think we're going to get that box as well, potentially. The POW that was here made at least 2 boxes, and this is actually one of the other boxes. I think this came from a guard that was here and who lives around this area, and he just gave this to a friends group. I'm not sure if for forever or just now, but I thought, what a cool piece of history, and that the friends group was trying to bring back here. So this was actually made by a POW while he was working here in the building that was right where you're sitting. And I think, from what I heard, this is his violin as well, that he had while he was a POW. From what, I think that's what the story is, but pretty cool stuff that we're bringing all the history back. That's one of the cool things that the Friends Group has been doing, is kind of showing not only the DNR, but trying to do some more presentations about the cool history Muscatine has. How long did you guys have? I think it was like an hour and a half you kind of wanted, or is it an hour? Okay.
Yeah, let me work on it.
I want to do this little history and then we'll kind of talk about a few fish and we'll take you out and show you some of that stuff too. I think was this that, it's not quite the, doesn't show up very good anyhow. There was just that description I was telling you about. With hard German work, we got this camp going and it looked great after that, is basically what it said. I love the wordage that the prisoner had when we were reading that. To kind of bring it all together though about this facility, in 1929 and 1933 is when the funds were not available, which is what I was kind of telling you earlier, is when then the POWs took off over after that. And so they didn't really do a lot of muscle research after that, because then you're starting to see different plastics come into play, especially in the World War II era. And so they weren't really doing any of the muscle research here anymore. In the 1950s, we had the whole ponds looked a lot differently. It was almost like they just kind of dug ponds wherever they easily could, and the dirt kind of flew up on both sides. And in the 50s, they actually made them nice, long, rectangular ponds that you see today. In 1973, the federal government wanted to get out of the business of having this particular fish hatchery and many other fish hatcheries actually as well. And so the state started operating it, and it wasn't until 1995 that we actually were given ownership. So now Iowa DNR operates this facility. So what we do today, I call this station a mixed unit. So a lot of places you'll go to for the Iowa DNR, it's either going to be a fish hatchery or it's going to be a management station. So you have a biologist that has like a few counties, and they manage the fisheries in that. One of the biggest things I like to say is that the Iowa DNR, for the fisheries and the wildlife and the game wardens that you hear about, we are only funded through hunting and fishing license sales. And there's also a 10% excise sales on like fishing lures. If you go to Walmart, the Rapala, when they make that fishing lure, and it comes, I think, is it Rapala, a U.S. brand? It might actually be a French brand if I remember right. But before that goes to Walmart, there's a 10% fee on that. That goes to the federal government. The Iowa DNR gets a certain percentage of that back based on how many fishing licenses we sell. And so that's our two funding streams, and that's it pretty much. We don't get taxes or income taxes, stuff like that from the general fund. So we have kind of a protected fund that we, and only we in the Conservation and Recreation Division can use. So what we do, fisheries management, environmental regulation, and fish hatchery, and how we're funded. As part of fisheries management, our district here goes from Lock and Dam 15 in the Quad Cities, so Pool 16 that extends down here to Muscatine, all the way down to Keokuk, and then just a little bit of the Pool 20 there at the end of Iowa, past Keokuk to the Des Moines River. A lot of what we do is we sample the fish and do long-term monitoring, so we'll kind of see what the fisheries population is doing over time. We'll take age structures off the fish. I'm not sure if any of you know that you actually can age a fish by looking at their scale. If they have a scale, you can count the rings in the scale, or you can take like a lot of times we'll take a clip of their fin and you can look at that, we'll slice it under a microscope and you can count the rings on that and tell how old the fish is. So a lot of those population dynamics things, we do a lot of number crunching for the fisheries management world. We also do a lot of working with the Corps of Engineers. This picture here is actually from down at Huron Island, just south of us. And we work with the Corps of Engineers as part of the mitigation for flooding all of the river. You know, it's not a free-flowing river anymore, it's a bunch of stepped pools. So we can maintain that 9-foot navigation channel and get all that corn up here that GPC needs. And so, now we're get it out of here actually. So as part of mitigation from changing that channel from a free-flowing graded river to that stepped pools, there is some money available to build habitats. So a lot of that backwater habitat now is kind of filled in with sediment. And so this particular project here is creating overwintering habitat. We have some research showing that about every 3 miles, our bluegill or bass need a resting area that doesn't have any flow coming into it, so they can kind of hang out there in the winter in deeper water where the oxygen is going to be there all year round, but basically no flow. Otherwise they don't do as good over the winter. So it's good to build those habitats. A lot of times in this particular location, we put some brush in there for them to hang out in, also really to attract them, and then a place for the anglers to be. And then in 2008, we used to have a lot of vegetation in many of our areas here, and we had a high water event back then that killed a lot of it, especially our lotus, the big kind of lily pad type plants that you see out in the river, and also species like arrowhead here. And so we tried planting it out there, but it just never seems to take. Inland, we tried doing that because we've lost a lot of our native aquatic vegetation, and that's how you get some of that green pea soup water, is because you don't really have any vegetation sucking those nutrients. The nutrients are going to be there when you have these wonderful Iowa soils that have all those nutrients. Something's going to use that energy. And in a lot of cases, it's that green algae that's kind of dispersed throughout the water column that makes that green water. But if you can get those aquatic vegetation sucking those nutrients out, then you can kind of take some of that water clarity and increase it a little bit. So we'd like to do that here too, but we just don't seem to be able to get it to come back until actually just recently we started seeing more of the yellow lotus coming back. But this here is a cage around a certain area. And there's some other pictures preceding this where it all grew up along here, which is what you would expected in a new area like this. The seedbed there, it would establish pretty quickly. But then soon after, this was all gone. And what's going on there? Well, we do have a species of carp that love it, an invasive species called grass carp. And I'm pretty sure what's going on here is there's just enough grass carp out there and they're eating all that. And so this little enclosure here, they weren't able to get into it. It kind of shows you the results there. Where they couldn't get into it, it's still doing good. One of our other sampling types is in that picture there. Maybe we should have moved into the other location with this, with that other projector. It's hard to see with this much light up here, folks. Environmental regulation is another aspect of this office. So this actually might have been at the, here in Muscatine. They needed to put in some new mooring dolphins. And so a lot of times, or maybe they might need to dredge in this particular area. So we want to protect mussels. We don't have any of those mussels left anymore. So what happens, what usually we'll do when they request a permit for that is we'll ask first, what's the mussel population in there? And so I think in this particular instance, there were high enough densities that we requested relocation. So then they relocate the mussels out of there. I'm trying to remember the other pictures that were in here. Before the dredging took place or before the construction took place. And that's kind of part of the overview process of working out the river, sometimes seeing endangered species or just higher densities of those mussels. And there's another dredging project here down by Burlington. And originally, this was all filling in to get back to, I think it was an ADM facility there. And we asked to see what kind of mussel population was in there. And it seemed like really it was just really along this edge. So kind of as a mitigation, we usually like to avoid any resources first, and that's why we eventually agreed on just minimizing it to the middle part there, and that way we didn't have to relocate any, and we just kind of move on and go do business that way. We also sometimes have train derailments or other environmental damages from various spills that we will have to work out of this office. This was a train derailment down near Keokuk, and so you can see some of the mussels that were killed by the coal dumping into the river there, and then just kind of documenting that and trying to assess the damage to the public's resources that were damaged in that spill. So that's another aspect that we do here. And then the most popular one, which I usually talk about the fish groups, or the kids groups, is our fish hatchery. So what we raise here at the fish hatchery, our big one right now that you're going to see out in the hatching building is our river strain walleye. We've actually just recently found with genetics that a lot of our inland lakes are river strain walleye are doing better than the lake strain that we propagate. So a lot of our lakes are stocked with walleye that are lake strain, and we might change that a little bit more to see if those river strain walleye are going to do better than what we've historically done. We also raise red ear sunfish, we raise bluegill here, northern pike, largemouth bass, and smallmouth bass occasionally. And also trying to get back to raising freshwater mussels. And I'm not sure, we don't really have a great example of that right now, but up in the reservoir, if you see those toads hanging off of the dock up there, we'll actually have baby mussels in there right now. And so they're only about that big right now. If you come later in the fall, I know I'll have kids groups and I'll say, well, let's go up and look at the mussels. Some of them they'll grow from that, especially if it's a black sand shell. We might stock them like that from a 1-year-old, and then in the fall they'll be that big already. So it's pretty incredible growth. We also do some research problems here that we try to solve. These little guys right here, the clam shrimp, we have in our ponds. They're a species that likes the up and down of the water that we have of filling a pond, raising our fish, and then draining it to get the fish out. And it allows their eggs to kind of stay and give us issues. And so we looked at controlling them with different stocking ratios of common carp or koi to try to control them, but not eat the walleye that we stock out there. So right now, we just finished our walleye broodstock collection. So we'll go out in the river, we'll electrofish, get our big mommy and daddy walleye, and bring them back to the hatchery. We actually cooperate now with a facility up in Cordova, Illinois, where we do kind of all like the pushing out of the eggs and the milt, and we do all that up there, and then just bring the eggs back down here. I'll try to, there's a lot of these slides that I had for a school group here the other day, so I might go through a lot of this pretty quickly. Time wasn't here for you guys. 6:11, yeah. We basically, inland, we like to just collect the fish, and we wait to this particular time of year when the eggs are what we call ripe. And so as soon as you touch the female, you kind of push on her abdomen a little bit, the eggs will just express out. It'll be that easy, and we just express them into a pan. Here in the river, they usually don't get to that point as easily, and so we have to inject them with a little hormone to get them to ripen up, and then they'll push out. We also collect the milt, and we actually extend that so we go up to 2 weeks just by adding a salt solution to that. So it's kind of one of those processes that we have done, and you can just sit in the refrigerator while we collect the eggs from the female. We'll go through some of this. Part of the process, we fertilize the eggs in the pan, and then those eggs don't have much water. So as soon as they hit that water, they start absorbing it. And that's what makes them sticky, that osmotic pressure that's wanting to pull that water in, and that's what's kind of adhering them naturally to the rocks out in the river. So that's a problem if we want to raise them in a jar, because then the whole darn thing's going to be a big old blob of eggs. And so once we get those eggs and fertilize them, we want you to put them in a clay solution and just gently stir them around until they kind of lose some of that adhesiveness, and then they'll put them out in the jars that you're going to see here later today. We have to let them sit in some hardenings as they soak up some more of the water as well. I go through a lot of this just out that building there. Yeah, I think I'll just quit there. We can talk about the other species out there. Maybe I'll go talk briefly about I spoke to you just since it's such a big deal for our hatchery here with the history of the mussel life cycle. Those mussels are actually having a lure where that fish is going to bite that lure, and then it'll just literally explode all these baby mussels up into the gills, and the baby mussels, the little kitty, will clamp down to those gills, and there'll be kind of a parasite on that fish for like 10 days, 20 days, depending on the species. And then that baby mussel will fall off into the sediment and grow again into an adult. And sometimes they don't have exactly a lure. They have something called a glutinate, which is basically a little worm that just kind of it looks like a worm, but it'll just kind of free float off, and then the fish will want to bite that, and that's when those little kitty will come out too. But that's the mussel life cycle. It's a crazy, kind of a crazy history. Actually, there you can see the lure. See, there's a real fish there, but then you can see that is actually the lure of mussel. And we'll sit there and flap that, and the fin that'll just move around, and the fish will actually look like a fish. I've got some great videos of that I could have put on here, or should have put on here. There's one of those blue mates, so that's floating around in the river. It looks like a darn little grub, or basically an invertebrate insect. But that fish bites into that, and all those things rip loose and get stuck onto the gills. My thinking is I don't have any AV system out here. I'm not going to show you that of the videos that were on those links. Here you can see it's kind of cool that one of the species that our partners at Cordova raise up there. We aren't doing a lot of that culturing yet. I'd like to eventually. Is black sand shell. And last year was the year it was really cool. They put all these little baby black sand shell in there. And when you open that box, you can kind of see how many are in there. They had all oriented themselves, just stacked right next to each other, an entire little tote like that, and they're all just sitting up like that, right next to each other. It was really cool to see. And there's that dock up in the reservoir, so when you leave, you'll see the little totes on.
And watch your step down there, it's kind of iffy getting down in there. The person who was setting it,
tiny little eyes.
Set a little bit higher. Maybe one jar's a little more sticky than the other. So we had a question here a little bit ago, and I should tell you about that. So what do we do with these fish? All the fish we raise here go into our kind of northeastern Iowa rivers. So like when the fisheries manager for that county has a river like Upper Iowa or Turkey, Muscatine River, Cedar River, they want some baby walleye put in there for fishermen. We produce those here. So we'll take these fry at 125,000 per acre. A lot of these ponds here start at about maybe 0.6 acres, kind of keep moving up to 0.8 acres. By the time you get way down there, they're at about 1.5 acres. So we'll put the fry in there into our filled pond in about 30 days, then we harvest the fish, and they should be a little under 2 inches. And then that's what we stock into all those northeastern Iowa rivers. And our trout hatcheries, we actually feed the fish. This hatchery is different. We don't have any fish feed here. What we do is we fertilize the water with alfalfa pellets or soybean meal, and both sometimes. So what we actually try to do is we fertilize the water to make it really green. Not what we usually want in Iowa, but we try to make the water really green because what we want to, we used to have a poster of it up here, I guess I don't see it right now. What we try to raise is zooplankton here. That's what we're growing and feeding. We raise the microalgae in the water. The zooplankton actually feeds on that. They're a filter feeder. They'll collect all those little particles of plants out there, those little microplants, the microalgae. They'll eat that, and then that's what our baby walleyes eat. We'll fill our ponds, ideally, maybe like 7 days before we stock these fish in, so we have to kind of plan for when we think these fry are going to hatch, because we want about 7 days of water sitting out there. That first 7 days we'll get something, a zooplankton called rotifers. And the rotifers are really, really tiny. As you get into the bigger zooplanktons like Daphnia, they're much bigger. So you can imagine if I put these in a pond that only had Daphnia, the Daphnia are about as big as these fry. And so the gate size in their mouth is really tiny right now. So if I can have that water filled with rotifers, which are really, really tiny, then these guys will have so much to eat, they won't even have to move. They can just keep eating as much as they want. We get a lot more survival. And then they'll gradually, as the water matures with bigger zooplanktons, then they'll just keep eating up the food chain. When we get to about 30 days or so, they've even shifted on to eating the tiny little insects in there. The chironomids, the little fly larvae that are in there. And there'll be so many walleye in there, they'll eat all those out. So once we have all that food out of there, what do you think they're gonna eat next? Baby walleyes, yeah, they're gonna be cannibals. That's why we gotta get them out right away. And then that's when we stock them. Sometimes people say, we want them bigger. Well, if we raise them much bigger, our return goes way down. The other species that we raise here, these are our most intensive ones. Our northern pike are kind of similar. We have to harvest the brood stock out of the river. We'll express the eggs and the milk, fertilize them here actually, and put the eggs on the jars, give them some while to hatch, and then we'll just take the jar and put those into a pond, or we'll put the fry into our Sebula lakes up by Sebula. We put them down at Lake Odessa and a couple other areas. We also will raise northern pike just by stocking mommy and daddy northern pike out in the pond and letting them do their thing when we catch them out of the river. And that's how we raise our rest of our fish, is we'll just put the male and female out there, pairs, our bluegills. Once our walleye are out of here, our ponds dry out for about 2 weeks, we'll fill them back up. Then we'll put about 70 pair of bluegills out there and let them do their thing. And then come October, we'll drain the water out. We have a bunch of 2-inch bluegills. So that's much less intensive. Our red ears are the same. Our largemouth bass, I keep going over there, that's a walleye poster. Our largemouth bass are a little bit different. We'll put them out there. Historically, we raised for the farm prawn program. We don't do that anymore. But we would actually swim with a net, get out in our swimming trunks, and swim a seine around a school of fry every day while we saw them, and take those fry from that day and that day only and put them in a pond. If we take them from another day later on and put them in that same pond, there's just enough difference that first day would eat our second day. Our smallmouth bass are less intensive here. We could probably swim and do the same thing, but we don't need that many of them, so we'll just put a few pair in a pond and let them do their thing. In 30-40 days, we'll drain the water out, and we'll have our baby smallmouth bass. Red ear sunfish are the same as bluegills. Just put our 70 pair per acre. We've actually, some of the work we have looked at recently is we would always hold our fish here, our brood stock, and they might get a spawn off while the walleyes are kind of finishing up their production. And we've started keeping them separate, but we don't really have the pond space for that, so we try to get them later. And getting them separate so they don't have that first spawn. Bluegills and red ear sunfish, they'll spawn multiple times a year, maybe every month, while the water temperatures are warm. And the second, third spawn, they won't get as many fish. So if we can find the space and find bigger fish, we might be able to come down to like maybe 15 pair per acre that we put out in the pond. All of our walleye, our usual quota is about what we pull out of the ponds, and that's assuming maybe a 50% return. Some years we might get an 80 or 90% return. Some ponds might be like a 10% return. But our overall return that we need to get is about 500,000 of the 2-inch walleye. That's what goes to all of our river stockings. The bluegills differ every year. Some years we might raise 500,000, and other years we might need 1.5 million of the 2-inch bluegills.
How many ponds do you have?
We have, counting the reservoir, I think we have 20 ponds. I should know that by heart, but yeah, about 20 ponds and maybe like 17.5 acres of water surface for our hatchery here.
Keep cranes.
What's that?
How do you keep cranes and, I don't know, like raccoons and other animals out of the pond?
When I first started here, we had a lot of, what's the name of them? Gosh, I can't think of them. We still have a few cranes. We had a few cranes then. We have a permit to shoot them, but we have to it's a federal permit, and we only can shoot so many. Ever since I've been here, we've never had to do that. It might be one, and we're not going to worry about it. we had this first species that we saw that one year. There was tons of them, and we still never shot any. White cormorant, a double-crested cormorant. They were just everywhere, and we were actually getting worried about it. We hadn't reapplied for our permit that year, so we didn't do it. The next year, we had a permit and had the approval to take so many from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then we didn't see them again. So it was like one year we had a glut of those cormorants that we had to worry about, and then we never saw them again. We occasionally have a problem with an otter. Like we'll keep adult broodstock out here, and I've noticed a few times we'll have fish and otter tracks everywhere, but we've never had a whole pond cleaned out yet. So we've been kind of lucky with that. You see the white eggs up here, those are the dead ones. We have a little siphon just that we'll pull water out and let it go into a bucket, and then they can kind of suck all those white eggs off. Those eggs will get fungus on them a lot easier, and so we treat with hydrogen peroxide solution every day to kind of kill that fungus off, but we also will siphon off those dead eggs once a day as well to keep that fungus level down before they hatch. You notice these things whipping around here. One of the problems we are trying to solve now is that we have a lot of dissolved gases in our water. Right now we suck out of this pond right next to us, and we get a lot of oxygen generation during the day, I think, and so it gets a lot of bubbles in here because of that. So these little aerators up there are trying to get that water off. Our northern pike, when we start, we don't have our ponds quite going yet, so we get a lot of more dirty water, and it kind of affects our eggs for our northern pike in here to the point where we've stopped doing it now. We just use our broodstock that we throw in the ponds. We'd like to switch over to well water. We'd have to run a line over here to do that. But our well water, if we put fish in it right now, it kills the fish in about 5 seconds. It's got so much hydrogen sulfide gas in it. And so we're going to have to rig up something similar to that, but maybe a big column that the water has to trickle through to get all those gases to come off. And then we could maybe have well water in here, which would be ideal because this year we had such warm conditions, and we can't pull out of the Mississippi River because you got so much sediment in it. So we kind of pump up to our reservoir, let some of that sediment flow up, or settle out, and that water kind of goes down to this pond. Some of that sediment settles out, so we get cleaner water. We'd like to use well water though, then you wouldn't have any of that sediment. And also with that water coming over here, we warm that water up so much right now. We've had some really warm days, and so that sunlight makes the water really warm. It will get so warm that our fish will develop so fast that if they develop in like 6 days, one year we had such warm conditions they did that, their mouths weren't actually even fully developed. And so you can imagine a fish doesn't have a mouth that works, isn't going to do too great out there. And so it'd be nice to have that well water. A lot of hatcheries will be able to kind of turn the valve and put that well water in there and cool that water down if we have warmer days, so you can kind of equalize it out. Or if it's really a cold year, we've had that too, where these might sit on there for almost 20 days, which is almost too much. So you're just kind of like, come on guys, get out of here. That's where it'd be nice to pull from the warm pond and speed things up a little bit. So I'm hoping we can get a well line put in here this year and be able to adjust that a little bit more for sediment and for our water temperature. Any other questions?
How many people does it take to in all of this?
We have 3 full-time employees and 1 seasonal employee. I just started maybe like the last week of March. And that seasonal will go till October.